Auckland Transport section of the presentation today, ladies and gentlemen. This is the first meeting where we have our new Chief Executive, Dean Kimpton, who will be leading the team, also accompanied by Mark Lambert, who, Executive GM Integrated Networks. Welcome, Dean. Welcome to everyone else that's with us today, Jenny, Wayne and Stacey, and I don't know if there's any others, but that's probably enough to start with. So welcome, Dean, back to the scene of your former glories, and this time as Chief Executive of Auckland Transport. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and it's actually really good to be sitting here. So thank you very much for having me back, everybody, particularly to Wayne, I think, and the board. But I thought I might just give a few comments about my my first few weeks on the job, some observations, maybe some reflections, and then we've got a presentation for you. But before I do, I want to acknowledge publicly both the board, but also Mark Lambert and the executive team for the work they've done over a very interesting 12 or so months. There's been a lot going on, a lot of change, and a lot of challenges. So just a few personal highlights. There's a lot of discussion about back to basics for Auckland Transport, and I agree, we have to absolutely do that, but I recognise the tension between back to basics and having a view to the long term. And whatever we do, and we had a reasonable discussion about it yesterday with the Expenditure Committee, my view is that whatever we do now has to be designed to make the boat go faster in the direction, in that strategic direction. So my view is Auckland Transport needs to do both. The other area that we've been putting a lot of focus on is listening to our customers and our community, and I'm really pleased to see that language coming through, even some of the media, your quote, Chair, in the media. But you know, this is a really, really important part of what we're focused on, and I'll talk about that shortly. But my take, we haven't listened as well as what we could have. We need to listen better, that's a focus. Public transport. We came out very early with some of the media I've done and have placed a target for what we want to achieve, and that's a shift from 80 million passengers movements per annum to 100 million. Our target is to get there late this year, early next year, month by month. So when you compare, it'll take longer to get there on an annual basis, but month by month we expect to be at that sort of run rate. The really interesting thing is that customers tell us they love the experience on the bus or on the ferry. What they're deeply frustrated with is getting to the bus or the ferry, okay? And I want to say that we've heard that, we understand that, and that's where we're seriously committed to addressing some of the challenges. And the things that we need to do, and we're aware of that, and I talk about it and I hear you talk about it, we need to look at how we optimise our existing services and assets, okay? But we also need more drivers, bus and ferry drivers. We need to get them trained, we need to get them funded, and we need to get them into our networks. A few areas that, so that's been the first 2 weeks, I guess, those 3 areas of focus. I was reflecting last night what it was like, and I'm having some paint work done on our house. And I call him Pat the Painter because that's his name. Said, how are you going? And I said, well, I'm not sure that I find it stressful, but I don't think my feet have touched the ground. So then just looking ahead, I want to touch on 4 areas. These aren't the only ones, but these are ones that I want to highlight that I'm thinking a lot about, and we are as an organisation. The first one is the capital program. And ensuring that we not only address the strategic direction that's coming through the Joint Transport Plan work, but we're also mindful that we actually have to land that into a regional land transport plan that is funded, prioritised and sequenced. I was really pleased to hear what Waka Katai had to say. We need, that integration is essential, but we need to integrate with the Auckland Light Rails, the addition of Waitemata Harbour Crossing and the private sector as well, alongside maintaining the existing quality of our assets. and listen to our customers and community around levels of service. That's a big challenge. We need to bring that all together into a funded program. I've got here addressing our commitments to emissions reduction. This is a really significant piece of work. That is why I'm so strong on public transport, recognising too that the use of cars on the roads is a very important part of our economic activity. So it's not about one or the other, it's about making sure we have an awesome choice for public transport. Working with our local boards in partnership with them will be a key area, and ensuring that Auckland Transport organises itself to align with these things that we're really focused on. So lots to do. It'll be very interesting. I look forward to keeping you updated through this committee. So can we just then, on that note, I'd just like to go to the more formal presentation. Am I operating it from here? Thank you, just checking. So you've got a report in front of you. I'm taking it all as read, if I can. That's what we'll cover off. I think we've done the first bullet point. I don't need to talk about that one anymore. There's a couple of highlights in there. There's been a lot of attention put on how we use technology to enhance the performance of our network. You can see that through that third bullet point. We are taking seriously this issue about how we use the public road space for temporary traffic management. We've recently written to the Mayor giving an update on progress on that. And there is good progress. Once again, I thank Waka Katai for the work that we are doing with them. We're very joined up on that. Some excellent work by Murray Burt and the team on behalf of Auckland Transport in terms of the way that we have been focusing on recovery from the weather events. We've got some performance metrics here. I'm sure that you've had a chance to read those. I've already referred to the PT satisfaction on the bus and on the ferry. We are working at the dissatisfaction associated with getting to it. And you can see a range of other metrics in there. Chair, I won't pull them out any more than to say I'd like to take them as read. We're tracking this, you'll see this in each report, but you know that already. That brings me rapidly to introducing Mark Lambert, who's going to pick it up from here, aren't you, Mark? Is that right? Yeah. I don't seem to have got the direction on the pointer quite right. Yeah. There we go.
Thanks, Dean. Good morning, councillors, Chair. So the next few slides are just running through an update, as usual, on our public transport performance. So I'll just go through this quickly and raise a few highlights. In the last month, we have been operating at a run rate of around 82 million annualised boardings per annum. Dean mentioned run rates and stretch targets. That is different to what we've actually carried over a 12-month period. So right now we are operating in the last few weeks at the highest level of patronage we have for a number of years, but of course that needs to translate into an annualised figure over time. So we are operating at around 82 million boardings per annum over the last few weeks. The actual boardings over the last 12 months is 67 million, and we're forecasting for this financial year to be around 67 to 68 million, and that's against our current SOI target of around 59 million. So we expect to beat our SOI target for this year. We have an internal stretch target of a run rate of around 85 million boardings per annum at the end of June. We believe we're on track for that, and as Dean's mentioned, we are setting ourselves an internal target, an aspirational target for run rates over month by month of around 100 million for next year, which is similar to how we have managed both the actual and the target forecasts for this year. In terms of some of the detail below that, so the bus driver shortfall is slowly improving. Last month we were at around 363 shortfall. At the moment we're around 357, so a minor improvement. We're about 16% short on the industry requirement for bus drivers, but we are expecting to see quite a big improvement over the next month or two. New Zealand Bus, Waiheke Bus, Pavlovich have all got new drivers in training, and this month Riches are bringing in around 36 new drivers, and they've also got quite a strong overseas pipeline as well over the next 5 to 6 months.
Yeah.
We do recognise that North Shore has struggled a little bit with the Riches depots, and we're pleased to say that will be a focus for Riches with those new drivers over the next few weeks or months. Ferry services continue to be impacted by the crew shortage, but again we're seeing some progress there. Through the Ministry of Transport, we've got support through a marine industry working group now, which is into its second month, which is helping us at a national level as well with the ferry improvement plan. Immigration settings were improved for ferry skippers on the 11th of April, which now allows Fullers in particular to really progress with overseas recruitment as well, which was a barrier until around April time. End of September is our target for returning bus services back to what we would call a normal reliability level on the back of bus driver availability. And through the two graphs on the left-hand side of the slide, you can see that the red line, which is Auckland, the top graph is the bus recovery rate, i.e. how much patronage are we carrying compared to pre-COVID levels, compared to Christchurch in green and Wellington in blue. You can see that we are starting now to get to the same level of recovery as those cities, and just as importantly, the bus reliability levels at the lower graph on the left, we are now slightly above Christchurch, and Wellington's got delayed figures, but we expect to be equivalent to them as well and really making improvements in the next few weeks. Just very quickly on the road network and productivity and performance on the road network. So as you'd expect, February road conditions worsened as we approach March Madness and the busiest time of the year for both public transport and road transport performance. For example, during February, during the morning peak, there was a minimal congestion of 69% on the arterial network, which effectively means that 61% reliable travel times were experienced. The measure of congestion we are aiming for is reliable travel times between peak periods and off-peak periods. And during February, which is one of our busiest periods, that was at 61%. The peak average speed across the arterial network reduced from 42.9 kilometres per hour in January down to 38 kilometres per hour in February. Again, recognising that that's one of our busiest times of the year across the transport system. I think I'll now hand over to
but with all residents able to access through one lane into their communities. I understand that number is now 8, so good progress continues. You've got a feel for the size of the geotechnical investigation and the ongoing work there with each of those communities to repair. So good work there, and happy to take any questions on it. The capital program, 92% of what we'd budgeted has been delivered, so some of the excellent work around and contribution from Wakakatai to the ferry upgrade and the electrification of that fleet. Operating performance, if I just tease out the focus for the business of Auckland Transport now is preparing for the next year's budget. And the way that we're looking at how we deliver both efficiently and meet the $295 million funding target that Council has set itself. Reduction plan. So I see that as a really, really important foundation for the way that we move forward. that's why I said that that's one of the areas I'm focused on. I don't think we are there yet in terms of how we fully understand what we need to do to achieve those targets. But we're yet to come back to you with an implementation plan. And let's be honest about it, much of it is unfunded. But we've got a really strong direction of travel, and we need to build that. We need to understand what the current interventions deliver, current and proposed, and we can talk about the busways, and we talk about CRL and all these things. How we optimise our existing network to get the most out of that, because that strongly contributes to emissions reduction. But there'll be other things we need to do, and I might, without getting myself in further trouble, I will look to Wayne, who is fully across this, because he's been leading it from a board perspective.
Thanks, Angelo. I think one thing I'm going to share about is that Auckland Transport Board and Executive are highly motivated to do everything we can when we can around emission reduction. And as we're meeting here now, we haven't stopped anything, I think, that would have contributed to that, perhaps for two cycleways that didn't attract Waka Kotahi funding. So everything still is live, but we've paused to make sure we're doing them the right way and recognise financial constraint. So, and I would also say that all the things that we need to do in the early stages of the emission reduction program are still in flight. And in fact, our funding is likely to be oversubscribed by just achieving those things alone, which is supporting opening a CRL, finishing Eastern Busway and the extra services to do that. So other than look for every other opportunity we can find, the resources we have are fully subscribed to it. There's another point I was going to make. I've just gone out of my head. So I'll come back to it. But the other thing I was going to say is, you've mentioned that the TERP targets are well ahead of government targets. In a way, that can be a little bit of a problem. And I would actually like the council's permission to align with the government, and particularly Waka Kotahi, around things like VKT reduction, because that would allow our two teams to work much more effectively together to get the most out of what government funding is coming for those kinds of things. At the moment, if we're separated by different targets, it actually gets a little bit harder for the team to work. So I think being able to, as I said, come back to doing what we can with who we can, as we can, would be really helpful at the moment.
Thank you. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Dalton, and that obviously will be something our committee has to pick up and get involved in. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, and I support that last comment. I just wanted to speak about you saying there's a tension between back to basics and the future. I think, just on behalf of the public from West Auckland anyway, it's a subjective term, back to basics, but it's in two pieces, and one of them is maintenance methodology, where we're not doing maintenance, we're doing call-outs, and people see that, and they see the downstream effect that that's having. The other side is, of that old-fashioned term, back to basics, is leadership by example. And I know there's a lot of complexity around health and safety. I know there's a lot of complexity in the modern workforce, but it's hard to get people to come on board with saving carbon and reducing kilometres when they see, 3, 4 traffic control trucks accompanying one person doing a job. It's not sustainable with finance. It's not sustainable with and the other thing is that we're almost victims of fossil fuels because they make life so easy. In the old days, when the jobs were done with a shovel, there was a much bigger driver to do it right and do it once. And so I think, back to basics is not denying the future. It's just saying there was a lot of things we used to do better that we could revisit. And I suppose to turn it into a question, do you agree with me?
Look, the tension I was simply pointing out is that we have to focus on our elements of our core business that have been called out and have been quite rightly pointed out to us in the letter of expectation. The assurance I'm giving everybody here is that whatever we do in this near term has an eye to the future, okay, and the strategic direction that you've agreed. So I don't want one thing to work against the other. There's a healthy tension in there. As for the very practical things that you pointed out, they all sound eminently sensible.
Mr. Chair, can I just add, I don't actually like the term back to basics. AT's always done the basics. The issue is doing the basics right, which is a forward momentum thing. So I much prefer that language. All right? We've never stopped doing what was basically required. We just need to do them better.
Maybe just come with a shorter version of those words to match the back to basics. Wayne, you can maybe work on that one. We're looking for a slogan here. Okay. Councillor Ferry?
Let's do the basics right.
Basics done well.
All right, thank you. So my questions are in two areas. The first, no surprises, is around bus drivers. So you mentioned some improvements and work with Ritchie's. I was wondering, we had heard, I think it was last month, that both Howick and Easton and GoBus had reached their full complement of drivers. Have we got any other companies that have reached that target yet? I'm particularly interested in NZ Bus because that's the one that delivers a lot of the routes in my area. So I'm curious to know what, if any, work is happening with NZ Bus in particular. And then I've got some questions around the DSI as well, please, Chair.
Through the Chair, I did mention NZ Bus in the presentation, so they've made a lot of progress, particularly with overseas recruitment and a pipeline that they have over the next few months or so. They aren't at full complement yet, but certainly all of our operators are expecting by September at the latest to be at either full complement or the ability to operate the full timetables.
So does that mean the full timetables prior to the recast, or are you talking about the recast timetables?
That will be subject to funding, which will need to be confirmed through this forum and as part of our next year's OPEX budget. But if we have the full funding, we should have the drivers able to deliver the full schedule prior to the suspensions.
Okay, and so just a supplementary then, you probably can't go into detail about this now, but I'm quite interested in, obviously Wellington's bus drivers have just gone up to $30 an hour. If NZ Bus is relying primarily on overseas recruitment, are there issues there where we might end up with a situation where, yes, NZ Bus recruits them, but after a short time we lose them to Wellington, or indeed NZ Bus loses them to other companies? I've heard that they've split the pay bump from central government and haven't put it all on the hourly rate. They've put some of it on penal rates instead, which is not necessarily a problem, but they are also, I understand, structuring their shifts and work so that there's a lot less overtime available to their staff, so that's not necessarily having the impact it might in terms of the pay incentives. Any comment on that?
I'm not sure about the splitting of the increased funding across penal and base rates, but I can certainly follow that up with NZ Bus or the shift from overtime. We have worked with all operators through the network recast to reduce the requirement for split shifts, which is a problem in the industry, so that might be what potentially you're referring to, but I can follow that up with NZ Bus. With regards to the base hourly rate of $30 an hour, a lot of councils, you're right, around the country have increased up to $30 through local share, and all this funding is subject to a combined 50-50% local share central government. We in Auckland have increased through local share 3 increases recently over the last financial year, but there is still a gap. We're at $28.32, I think, from memory, and we would like to, next financial year, subject to funding, to be able to close that gap.
Okay, I'd be interested in a bit more information at a later point about why our companies aren't able to offer the 30 that others are, but I'm happy to take that offline. The DSI questions, the breakdown by local boards is really interesting and valuable, but I think it needs a little bit more nuance for us. So it would be helpful to have that presented in a way that perhaps provides us with a bit of context around geographic area, population base. Are we, so for example, Rodney being at the top there and has a massive amount geographically of our area, but a very small population. So I think there's some considerations there. Also, more likely, I imagine, more of those accidents are happening in a high-speed environment. So it would be helpful, I think, to have some of that context. So if that can maybe be looked at for future reports. It was interesting that you said that speed is still the main factor. So some context around that too. Could we maybe have that slide up? Is that possible? That would just be a little bit helpful, I think, because one of the issues there was around the type of crash movement. And so I thought that was a really interesting analysis and way of looking at it that might help us, because given that a lot of the, I think it was slide 12 if I remember correctly, given a lot of the 60% are, just under 60% are vulnerable road users, that language in the crash movement seems very sort of driver oriented, which I understand. But it would seem to me that a lot of those vulnerable road users are probably in that run-off road category. So it would be interesting to understand that a little bit more. For example, a lot of the cyclists are probably in that run-off road category. So could we have in the future it'd be good to have a bit more context and analysis. But what sort of are your initial thoughts around that?
Thank you for your question, through the chair. We do have a lot more detail, slices we can go through. So the idea would be to try and provide that different views in terms of each time. So we do publish an equity view every year, and so that is available, and I'm happy to share that, which does go through in terms of those population statistics. They will be updated once we get the updated census data, which will be helpful, and it does change the views, absolutely, in terms of that, as well as the vulnerable road users piece, in terms of more detail in terms of the why. But we are producing quite a lot more in terms of that detail that we're publishing in our monthly report as well, which is available on our website. So this, what you see here today, is new reporting. We've recently started doing this, but it's also been quite helpful in terms of particularly that equity view that we used when the team went out to the local boards to talk about katoa ora in terms of what that meant for them locally. So we are sharing that and getting more into the detail to understand the why, to help in terms of future and what we do and what we focus on.
Thank you. And I wonder if, and I'm sort of looking at the Chair of Regulatory and Safety there, whether there's an opportunity to have a little bit of a conversation at that committee too about some of these safety aspects and how they might align with some other safety initiatives that Council is doing separate from Auckland Transport. I'm also quite interested in the road suicide issue as well, that will be a factor in particular on some of the run-off roads and the head-ons. But I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ferry. Some good questions there. Councillor Simpson.
Thanks, Chair. Dean, welcome to the job. Gosh, if you can achieve that in 2 weeks, what are you going to do in 18 months, eh? Stacey, I just want to say just a personal thanks for your work in the floods. It was tough and you did a great job, so thank you. Mark, thank you again, and welcome everybody. Look, my great minds think alike. I'm glad that slide is still on, because safety, the lives of everybody in this region, whether they live, work or visit, is paramount importance to all of us. So DSIs are kind of really, really up there. There are still people in Auckland that think reducing speed is not a good idea. So what I'm interested in is to have a look at the results, and congratulations on lowering Auckland's when New Zealand has stayed still. What I'd like to see through you, Chair, if I may, some sort of a chart that shows us the investment that Auckland Transport has done in areas to reduce DSIs and to show that it works. Because time and time again, you get people saying, no, this is not a good idea, we don't need to reduce speed, it shouldn't happen. But you've got to prove that what you're doing and the investment that you're making equals results. Now, I looked at that chart, I looked at Orake, and there are still deaths. Now, we've had significant investment in my ward to reduce speeds, and I'm really keen on knowing where those deaths occur. Were they anywhere near where that investment was made, or were they in areas that there has been no investment? This will help sell our story. Stacey, you know what the game is. Communication, communication, communication. And if you've got tangible examples where that investment has worked and you can prove that, it makes the rollout of your program that much easier. Are you able to do that? Tagged on my question at the end.
Thank you, through the chair. Absolutely we can. And so we can go into that detail. I can't give it to you right now, but...
Asking for it now, but I am
Yep.
asking when you present next time, to
Absolutely, will do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson, and Stacey, we can maybe pick up some examples there. We don't have to have them all, but a couple of examples maybe in Orake would be a good idea. Councillor Darby?
Thanks, Chair. I've got 3 questions. The last one's in a couple of parts. Stacey first. When we workshop recently, I just highlighted the importance of understanding the underreporting rate. And when I look at that slide, it's not pretty. And in the last week, it's been most unfortunate. But that underreporting rate at our hospitals, formerly district health boards, is apparently at a rate of 7. I mean, those stats there, the death and serious injuries are probably accurate because they're probably accurately recorded, but it's, I think that underreporting rate is the other injuries. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes, absolutely. So in terms of underreporting, we estimate it's about 7.9 for cycling type injuries and about, I think, 2.9 for pedestrians. So we are working on layering that data so we can actually get that full holistic view of what that looks like. We do have the MOH data, ACC data, so we can actually build what we call a proper dashboard in terms of road harm. The idea also will be to obviously look at the economic cost of harm. And so that sort of helps when we frame investment decisions as well. So we are working towards that. It takes a little bit of time because we want to make sure that the data we're using is correct and that we can actually provide that back. It becomes tricky in terms of when we're putting it against local board area because it's by DHB zone, but we can obviously put it more broadly.
So would that lead, sorry, second part to that one then. So would that lead you to review and recommend to your board or senior management how much should be allocated to that area? If that underreporting rate is so significant, surely that brings you to refocus at your road safety program immediately. I mean, it just clicks for me that you have to have a serious new look at how much, how much budget goes into that area. Would that, once you do that work, would you ultimately be making a different recommendation in terms of what should be spent there?
Through the chair. It will enable us all to have better conversations about it, I think, in terms of that. That's the first thing that we really want to do, is so that we actually have that proper view. So what you see here is the CAS data. So that's the crash analysis system that is limited to police attended events in terms of where there is, death and serious injury. So when I use those multiple factors, the 7.5 or 9 or 2.9, that is by going through the MOH data. Yeah. So that is real. These are injuries that have been recorded in the hospital system as occurring on our roads. So yes, we can, but we do need to make sure that we go through that process so that we actually have that robust view and it's tangible and it's been quantified. So once we've got that, we can then obviously have better conversations about speed management as it may be, or in terms of enabling better infrastructure for active mode users as an example. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. The second question was largely handled by Councillor Ferry, but I think it would be helpful to get an A4 response from Mark, because I'm also hearing, Chair, that not all bus companies are passing on. Like, I'm hearing a particular bus company, Councillor Ferry referred to that company, is paying current drivers $26.25 and new drivers $29. I think we need to know who's getting what, and what Auckland Transport needs to do in that regard to make sure our expectations and the Minister's expectations are met. I'll leave that one there, Chair, but the last area is for Dean and Wayne. We had a workshop and we had, I think, 12 slides on the revised parking strategy. And Wayne, your board actually thought it was a good idea to send it back to the Transport Infrastructure Committee. It didn't come to a business meeting, it came to a workshop meeting, and there was can't be a decision on it, and there is no decision because there's no paper here today. And I'm not sure how your board is going to treat that supposed feedback, Wayne. What I want to say is, at no stage in that presentation did we see the revised parking strategy. In fact, not even our parking strategy unit had seen the revised parking strategy. They received it the following day, the day following the workshop, that is, after I queried that. Look, there are some issues there. I'm not sure how you're going to handle it at your board, Wayne, but good luck. But, Dean, is it your expectation that your strategy unit works hard alongside our strategy unit together?
The simple answer is yes. I can't imagine why it would be anything different, but that was a very direct question with a particular issue in mind, but the principle is yes. But as for the particular, the room to move or the parking management strategy, I'm going to hand it to Wayne. Is there anything you wanted to add, Wayne, on that?
I'm not over the issue you're raising. I just, from my perception is that a lot of good work is being done on the parking strategy, and the version we're looking at now is one that's workable as we have to work things through different communities. So I'm a bit puzzled by your comment and question, frankly. Yeah.
Well, look, you may not be aware of it, Wayne, but we had a workshop on the revised parking strategy, but we did not have the revised parking strategy. And we had no advice from our own transport strategy unit, because they were not involved until a day later. So look, I won't dwell on it. I just want to, you're before us. I need to convey that because I'm sure, Wayne, that when you receive your executive advice, you're expecting they've done the job that your board asked them to do.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, you finished that? Okay, thanks, Councillor Darby. Councillor Baker, Hills, Bartley, Foley, Sayers and Henderson. Strap yourself in, guys. Councillor Baker.
Yep, my one's really quick and I'll stay right away from death and serious injury. And so I asked a question of a Kiwi Rail last time they were here, and I was suitably unimpressed with their response in regards to stage 3 of the track closure. And I note a comment by Randia in the past presentation from Waka Kotahi about using shoulders of the motorway for bus lanes. And so my question is, on behalf of the users of the train from Otahu South, that are likely to have a significant imposition and change to our travelling habits, no, it doesn't, what work is being done with Waka Kotahi and Kiwi Rail to mitigate the significant disruption that is planned with stage 3 closure of the rail line, because it is going to be huge.
Feels like my question. We have extensive conversations, and we're finalising some options, hopefully with QRL, to bring back to the AT board very shortly on peak only running on through stage 4, I think is what you're actually referring to, of EMUs through that peak only period, in peak only directional running as well. So that would be our preference. We've said to QRL that is our only preference. If for whatever reason they simply cannot accommodate that, then yes, we would need to look at shoulder lanes and things like that on buses. But as you know, the buses will be the issue, not necessarily the shoulder lanes. But yeah, so hoping to get a mitigation in there, at least for the peak travel periods.
Okay, Councillor Hills?
Thank you, Chair. On the DSIs, obviously 47 families never see their loved ones again, and 601 people's lives changed potentially forever, and that's just in 1 year. I do hear a lot of concerns or pushback on things like safety, speeds and pedestrian crossings, but in my ward the schools are all fighting over who gets the next one. So there is two sides to that story. But if there is a political pushback on some of this, do you feel, and maybe it's I guess for Wayne or Dean as management as well, do you feel a responsibility, governance responsibility, personal responsibility to do this work anyway, to save lives and stop kids getting run over, etc.? Because it's a serious question around whose responsibility is the deaths if we push back on safety.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I think one of the things the board takes very, very seriously is its responsibility for the transport system to be as safe as possible. So if we get technical advice that the particular circumstance is unsafe and we should do something about it, we will do something about it. But it's this all involves communities, and what we're undertaking, and this is one of the reasons for bringing all this data together, is to be able to have good conversations with local boards, etc. Because sometimes it's not just one answer or one technological solution. You can come up with a different approach to how streets are treated to make them safer and operate a bit slower without just putting, say, a speed sign up. So, answer to your question, very serious. We won't knowingly let a dangerous situation continue, okay? But what we would like to do is work it through in a way that actually makes sense for communities and they're happy with it.
Thank you. And on, I guess, back to basics, bread and butter, all those sort of lines that are popping out at the moment, and it's great to hear, Dean, your comments on climate, but I guess, and it is a bit worrying to hear you, Wayne, as chair, because I know you've been a huge supporter of TERP and the climate plan, but the whole point of the stretch targets or the different aims is because the government's targets and the Paris Agreement relies on us as a big city to do far more than the government's targets, because we have to pick up far more of the slack for the country to reach there. So I guess my concern is, A, we're not even aiming for the government's weaker targets, but the whole point of what we all passed unanimously a couple of times and then working with AT supporting that was because as a city, and the largest city, we have to, is the board and management aware of that? The whole point of us having stronger targets than the government is because that's how the maths work.
Yes, it is. I think just can I just ask that you cut us a little bit of slack here, because we've had an election result that's causing the organisation to actually have a fundamental review about how it does its work. We've been asked to reduce costs and those kinds of things. We're introducing a new chief executive to the organisation, and and we're trying to do that in a way that we are still capable of addressing the big issues for the future, because they are not going to go away. And once we get through what I might call the more mechanical shifts and changes that we have to make to get on budget and to do things in a different way, we are very definitely going to address our our minds in terms of how do we think differently about everything we do. So actually it doesn't increase emissions, it actually reduces emissions. It makes the transport system more equitably accessible to different people. And there are things we can measure, there are things that way we can think about things to actually take every possible opportunity to do that. So no, we haven't forgotten. The board reminds itself many times that it actually, we endorse to you as the pathway to meet your climate strategy, and we're certainly not backing away from that, but we've got to be realistic given the legs we've got at the moment about what we can do, and and I'm reasonably satisfied that we're doing everything we can do as we can at the moment. But that's not to say we're going to stop looking or not going to try harder. And my comment about sort of looking to the particular government target, which is because the government said we want to address VKT. We're prepared to fund a program or a plan to do that. What my argument was, it makes it a lot easier for the AT team to say we are working with Waka Kotahi on that with this target in mind, not our own target. So I'm about trying to create momentum and create a trajectory. Might be not the one we want, but it's a hell of a lot better than what we're getting if we don't do anything. Okay?
Yeah, thank you, Wayne. I think it was a very compelling answer. Councillor Bartley.
Cool, thank you. My question is on the DSIs, and it was really about how the targets are not being met for vulnerable road users, the increase in serious injuries, and then noting in one of your previous reports that if road safety is only delivered through upgrading infrastructure, the estimated costs are 14 to 26 billion for the urban arterials. So what is the way that we are going to try and address the DSI rates? Is it going to be hanging on katoa ka ora? Is that how we're going to look to do it? But are we also still looking at the infrastructure? Because, we've probably all got schools and communities that are asking for speed bumps and pedestrian crossings and, measures to kind of slow down traffic. So that was my question around that. Yeah, for now. I've got another question, please.
Thank you. So we're not relying purely in terms of speed management. We still do have an infrastructure program, albeit it is likely to be reduced in terms of the coming financial years. And they're not the only levers we have. We also obviously have Road to Zero in terms of some of those other levers that the sector's trying to pull and encourage in order to get shift more broadly across Aotearoa as a whole. And so we're very much obviously working with our road safety partners to do that. So it's not a one thing approach. There's multiple things that need to happen in terms of obviously the enforcement side, in terms of both passive and then police presence. And so there's definitely multiple things that need to happen in order to make a substantial reduction. So no, it's not purely speed management we're looking at here. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Really keen to work together with Auckland Transport about some of those other measures. And I really take to heart what Wayne said, your chair, that we won't let a dangerous situation continue because when there are DSIs, I do know about it in my ward, especially in terms of cyclists. I've had Levi James be killed in Royal Oak, Melissa Reyes be killed in Mount Wellington, Krypton Mate Kualava killed in Pamua. They were all on bikes. So really need to put some more action to the words of not letting a dangerous situation continue that we all know about. Picking up the suggestion from Councillor Ferry, already asking if our committee can pick up this DSI safety work in the Regulatory and Safety Committee. But my other question was this back to basics. I was concerned about this rhetoric that's coming through from Auckland Transport about back to basics, because it does feel like it is about the here and now, which is kind of narrow. And I wanted some guarantees that it's not limiting us as a city to future-proofing in this back to basics. And then, who's making the decision about what those priorities are as core services if it's not coming through us? So I really want to, ensure that whatever the core services are that are going to be focused on, that it's priorities that will ensure we're catering to all our road users. Thank you.
I'm not going to use that phrase anymore. Because I think it's spun the conversation in the wrong direction. I've tried to be really clear that we've got things we need to do to continue to improve our everyday delivery and performance. And while we do that and address the budget challenge, we've got a firm eye to the future. And I don't know how to put it any more simply than that, Councillor. We have to do both superbly. Good organisations do both. We are very committed to making sure we live within, or cut our cloth according to what's been given to us, and we keep a firm eye on the future. I think that's the core issue. Then how do we make decisions on the way through? Then, look, my expectation is that when it comes to investment decisions, whether it's a service or whether it's a capital project, that we're considering it against those strategic objectives that we've agreed with you. If that's equity of access, if that's emissions reduction, VKT reduction, if it's a level of service on a freight corridor so that we can have movement of goods, we need to be stress testing all of our investment decisions against the strategic priorities that we've agreed with you. That's how we make investment decisions. So I'm not sure how to put it any more simply than that at this stage.
I was seeking a guarantee, and that's a guarantee, so I'll rely on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. We have Councillor Fully online.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you and welcome back, Dean, to the organisation. Great to see the work that you've already started and that you've hit the ground running. Also, big thanks to Auckland Transport, to your staff who assisted us out in Mangere at the Civil Defence Centre in making sure that our people who were coming to the centre were safe and that the recovery was, smooth as well, as smooth as possible. My questions are similar to those posed by the Deputy Mayor. The DSIs for my two local board areas, Otara Papatoe and Mangere Otahuhu, have traditionally been high. And it's sad to see that they are still, ranked fairly highly in the slide and in the stats. But over the last 3 terms that I've been involved with the local boards, both local boards have been putting initiatives in, have been working hard with Auckland Transport and with the local communities to try to slow down speeds and make the streets safer for motorists, pedestrians and for cyclists. Notably in Mangere, there was the Future Streets, that was maybe 2 terms back, and in Otara Papatoetoe more recently, the Safer Streets program in Papatoe. And over the last 3 terms, they've been working to raise the pedestrian crossings in and around our schools. Many of those have been at the request of the schools themselves. My question then is similar to the Deputy Mayor. Do you have stats that show whether the speed has been reduced and to what degree they've been reduced in those areas where those initiatives have been put in? And I accept that, the Papatoe one is quite recent, so you may not have stats. And if you do, have you presented those back to the local boards and back to the communities that were involved? Because I know that, especially in Papatoe, the communities were very involved and very engaged right from the start, right from the planning to delivery in all of those initiatives. And have you gone back and presented those stats and told that story and showed what the effect has been? I'm sure it's positive because I hear from the residents on the street that it has been positive, that their experience has been that the speeds have been reduced. But have you gone back and told that story? Kia ora. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for your question. We have gone back more broadly, but in a generic way. And what I mean by that in terms of presenting the information, the positive impacts from the speed changes since 2020. So we have not drilled down by local board area or presented that information. So I thank you for the feedback on that today. So we got a good message and a takeaway on that. Some of the ones that we've done more recently, we do need a substantial reporting period to be able to actually mirror back to. So we will do that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Foley.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question probably for each of the presenters, but I just think it's appropriate to acknowledge Dean and to welcome you and congratulate you on your appointment to the role. And also, you know, I just would like to echo your acknowledgements that you made to Mark and the senior management team and the board. So the first question, Stacey, might be more towards you, and that's just in terms of the breakdown of the incidences, perhaps the speed-related ones that might be happening in Rodney. Is that possible? Because we've got quite a large unsealed roading network up there as well as our sealed networks, and I'm just curious if we're able to get a breakdown. You don't have to give it today. Can you do that by network type, like sealed or unsealed? So that might be useful for our local board and myself as a councillor, and perhaps for other wards that have unsealed networks in them to understand. Yeah, okay, thank you. So I was thinking, that was meant to be a question. Maybe to you, Dean, just picking up the point that Councillor Turner was making about the amount of health and safety support, I guess, that we see around our contractors out there on network. And he used an example of, you know, so many traffic management vehicles around one person perhaps collecting up litter or whatever it might be on the side of the road. Have you got any generic thoughts or ideas how's that possible under the health and safety legislation to get improvements in terms of cost savings or reductions without compromising our contractors' ability to keep their staff safe? Did you want to make any comment at this stage, or is that something you want to ponder a bit longer? I know just because you acknowledged that, you know, that there probably logic might tell us that there's some need to think about that in terms of savings.
Two-part answer. I need to ponder on it longer, but to reassure this committee that there is a very targeted program led by Andrew Allen and his team around how we manage this temporary traffic management issue that's been highlighted. And it's probably mostly measured in orange cones, but actually the deeper issue is safety of the construction staff or the road maintenance staff and the safety of those using that part of the network at the time. So how can we do that more efficiently? How can we do it more cost effectively? How do we limit occupation of the public road space? And we all have identified examples of creep. How do we take a more risk-based approach? So all of these things are on the table, including if occupation of that road space is going to take longer, what the charging regime might be around that. So all of these things are on the table. They're being worked at actively. We are reporting on that through our letter of expectation. We're happy to give you an update as that starts to emerge at this committee. And, you know, there's a good dose of, we've used the expression tension. There is a tension between ensuring people are safe in whatever role they have to play or wherever they are, and the safety intervention that we provide. And, you know, we have to work through that carefully, and our contractors are rightly cautious about that, okay? So there's some stuff here that just needs to be worked through, especially when speed is involved, nighttime, wet road conditions. None of the examples you gave, Councillor Turner, talk to that. I'm not confused about what your point is. But there are some things here that need to be thought through and thought through carefully, okay? So I'm happy to bring it back through.
That's helpful, Dean. Thank you. And, you know, there's obviously driver behaviour themselves, you know, they're creating, you know, going through those works. And the final question, I don't, Dean, might be for you or for Wayne or jointly, and that's just because I've raised it previously, and Wayne has made comment that there would be some thought given to it and perhaps come back to us at a later time. Wayne, I'm just trying to get a feel for how that occurs and when it might occur. And this is about the whole funding model right back at Wellington, if you want, in terms of how Waka Kotahi gets funded, therefore Auckland Transport gets funding. The current funding model that they use at the moment, we've obviously got decreasing revenues that are coming into the ministry there about other ways of funding New Zealand's transport and therefore Auckland Transport's funding as part of that. Is that something that's actually an active conversation that's happening underway? I had the impression, Wayne, that it was something that you might come back to us at a later state, but is that something that the board of Auckland Transport is pursuing with Waka Kotahi or not?
Oh, I think it's one of the biggest subjects that is going to have to be cracked over the next 6 months, quite frankly. The National Land Transport Fund, which is funded by road user charges and fuel excise duty, won't cut the mustard in terms of investment and ongoing programs. And I think the big risk is you're going to end up with multiple funding systems, which is only going to make the whole environment even more complex. So if we have to run an RLTP, for example, which is focused on the National Land Transport Program and the hypothecated fund, but that only does 60% of what you need to do, and you've got to come up with another system to get, say, capital appropriations from government or private sector investments or that kind of thing. It's just going to make our world more and more difficult and more complex. So it's a work in progress. I think everyone knows what the issues are, but it's just, and I'm rather hopeful that the joint transport planning process that's happening at the moment between Mayor and Minister's offices will actually shine a real light on that as well. Okay. So I think it's something we need to keep up with. Yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Sayers. And just so members, it's my intention to break for lunch after this item. I think that'll be appropriate timing. So in that respect, we have Councillor Henderson, Williamson, Simpson, and then I think Councillor Fletcher will wind things up. Okay, Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. A few questions. Firstly, to the Chair. Talking about doing the basics right, has there been a discussion about what the basics are?
I think, well, it's sort of every public transport service runs well and customers know where it's at and what to expect. It's every piece of pavement not failing but actually being looked after and not deteriorating with time. It's about footpaths being smooth. It's out. It's out there to see. It's everything that's sort of out there now and people use and making sure that they are delivered the right way, the most cost-efficient way, and the right communications are happening with the people that use it. Okay, so yeah, you could write a long Bible on it, I'm sure.
Thank you. Deaths and serious injury reduction, is that part of doing the basics well?
Say that again.
Deaths and serious injury reduction, is that part of doing the basics well?
Yes, it is, but I think there are multiple parties that have basics to do. It's about the police. It's about those who own vehicles. It's about those who warrant vehicles. It's about those who drive. It's not. It's we have a part to play in terms that the infrastructure is fit for purpose and the regulatory regime are on those networks like speed are appropriate for the use they're being put. So it's, I think transport is one of those areas where everyone has a role, and I've been involved in road safety for quite a while now. I think I was the CEO of Land Transport New Zealand when it was integrated between Transfund and LTSA, and I know these are long run games, and I know if you take your eye off one of those components, it comes back to bite you in time. So it is that's why we've said, we've got this Tamaki Makaurau Safety Governance Group, because the purpose of that is to get every organisation to play their role the right way all the time, and it's not easy, I can tell you that.
No, thank you. Just two more, thank you, Chair. When we have a death, is there a mechanism where Auckland Transport goes back and audits the area to ensure future safety?
Yes, and the board gets a report after each fatality about what happened and how it occurred. Yeah.
That's great, thanks. Last one. So we've been offered a deep dive into public transport for our wards, which I think is a really good initiative. Could we look at doing the same for deaths and serious injuries data for our wards?
I think the answer is yes. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Good suggestion. Councillor Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I may be able to speed through this quickly. Will the same team of people be available when we do the next paper on speed reduction? Or are you all leaving after this? Will you all be here at the presentation? Because my question's more specifically about speed reduction, but everyone else has been having a crack at everything going, so I'd be happy to do it now or leave it till we get to the specific paper.
Probably
You'll be here for the specific one. Yeah. Okay, then I'll leave my questions because they're mainly about speed reduction.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Williamson. Councillor Simpson, a quick follow-up, I understand.
Sorry, yeah, just a quick follow-up actually for Councillor Greg. Just brought something to mind on road cones. But my first question is, Chair Wayne, you said one of doing the basics was keeping footpaths or being smooth. I do hope you're going to write to Rod Stewart. And if you haven't already, I suggest that you do, because it would be really nice for him to get a nice letter telling him how our footpaths are going to be smooth. Because you'll be aware that he made a media statement about it. And Auckland, we want to be the place that international acts come with regularity. But I want to go and just give you an example on road cones and the spend and the war against road cones, just by way of, to you again, Stacey, from a comms perspective, just to give you an example. We've got some work happening on Tamaki Drive, footpath upgrade, separation with a cycle lane, etc., right? A whole lot of vehicles parked along there. There are road cones all the way beside those vehicles, all the way, every day. But when those vehicles aren't there, there is parking there. So mums and babies can get their children out, no road cones, and they're supposed to be kept safe. So the communication around when you put all these road cones out for these projects is hard for some people to understand when they're never there, when anybody else parks there. So again, you've got to explain the why, and is it really, really necessary? So that was just a quick story.
You'll take that by way of comment. Just a very quick observation from me, and it's to me it's surprising how glaring this particular road user type, and that's motorcyclists, who make up 23.1% of the deaths and serious injuries. And I know with motorcyclists going right back to the 60s, 70s, 80s, a disproportionately high number of the fatalities on the road. Yet my anecdotal observations is that there's far less motorcyclists now as a proportion of the population than was the case back in the 70s, where that was a popular form of transport for all manner of people. And I guess that leads to my own observation is that some of these trends are deeply ingrained in the driving culture of New Zealand, and if you compare our driving culture to other driving cultures overseas, it's a lot to shout about. No amount of interventions can sometimes alter deaths and serious injuries as a consequence of that driving mentality. So I just before I hand over to Councillor Fletcher, I'd just really like to thank the board for all you're doing. It's incredibly challenging times on a whole number of fronts. COVID, floods, public transport crisis, and certainly from my observation and the feedback I'm getting from the community is that people appreciate the effort that AT's making and understand the way that they're really challenged at this particular time in our country's history. So thank you all for that. So, Councillor Fletcher, I believe you'd like to move to receive the presentation and also make a brief comment. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Hills, thank you. And just over to you, Councillor Fletcher.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I don't want to delay people from their lunch break. But in speaking to this report, which contains an awful lot around the challenges that are confronting Auckland Transport at the moment, I also want to speak to the role that you are playing as our chair, because I think you've taken the approach that transport isn't just about Auckland Transport. Transport is about, more generally, Waka Kotahi, it's about Kiwi Rail, it's about the footpaths, it's about so much. And the visibility that you're giving us and the opportunity to interrogate this, I think is showing a real depth in the opportunities we have to explore those areas of interest. I want to acknowledge Barry Potter as our lead officer for the way in which he has used his relationships with those other organisations to enable us to actually really try and form a much more comprehensive understanding of the challenges for the region and going forward. I recently had the opportunity of chairing a small group looking at board appointments for Auckland Transport, and it was a great privilege to do that. But what really drove home for me was the respect that was always there, but just the depth that the acting chair, Wayne Donnelly, has brought to Auckland Transport. It was probably to be chair for this time was not of his choice, and I really, really want to acknowledge the personal sacrifices that he has made and the integrity with which he brings so many of the issues that we're talking about now, the consideration and the fierce determination that in the governance structures as we go forward, that these are qualities that are respected, and issues around health and safety. I was, it really was a great privilege to spend some time with Wayne Donnelly and understand just how hard things are at a governance level for the board in terms of meeting the expectation. And we do, we've got formal processes with statements of intent, and then we've got the complexities of legislation where we're trying to run parallel paths with what we are required to do within Auckland Transport and the RLTP, but just the very careful way in which the board and management have been attempting to grapple with this in the changing political environment that they find themselves in. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge also Mark Lambert, probably somebody else who had to really step up and over this period as our acting CEO, the impressive work that he has created and the platform for Dean to come in and the stability that he has created in turbulent times. So, in welcoming Dean, I think you're coming in at a time where everyone has really stepped up, and that is just incredible. But what I wanted to do was to take an opportunity to recognise a retiring staff member for Auckland Transport, and that is Stephen Rainbow. Stephen came to Auckland. I got to know him as a Green Party politician in Wellington, and I got really interested because I had been chairing the committee, Transport and Environment, before climate change was a thing. We drilled in with Helen Hughes and others into the whole issue of transport emissions, and I got to know Stephen. And when I became mayor, I invited Stephen to come up from Wellington to assist with the rail corridors issues and the rethinking of Britomart. And I didn't realise until he came up just the power of this creative, incredible individual who had a very real vision for how public transport could actually deliver on so many of the things that we've been talking about for such a long time, and how he made it about the issues and he never made it about himself. And then watching him remain, he continued, I think he provided the Max Hardy equivalent for Mayor John Banks, who had up until then been less enthusiastic about public transport in Britomart and so forth. And he kept the dream alive, he kept the CRL alive, and he did so much in terms of building relationships, never by polarising people, but simply through the skillful art of communication and the building of relationships. And I know, and I could go on with a lot of other things that he has done beyond that, but I know that in terms of Tūranga Waiwai, he's called to go back to Nelson. You know, he's wanted to go back to Nelson for a long time, but he has made an enormous contribution to shaping Tamaki Makaurau, to shaping Auckland, and I can think of nobody who has so consistently ensured that the narrative around the importance of public transport, the CRL, and what will then come forth. And he also helped me greatly in trying to get a light rail program off the road, so to speak, through that time, which is a story in itself. But a man of considerable vision, a man of great kindness, and I think that he will be a significant loss to Auckland Transport and to Auckland more generally. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to say a few words, but also to thank you again for the opportunity you're giving for a lot more public debate on these matters. We had Todd Niall asking that we have more of our workshops to be held in public. And I think, you know, some of the issues that we've got today have come about because of your desire that there be greater transparency on issues. And I think that's going to be a big step up for all of us to show the maturity that we can actually come to grips with the issues. But I'd really like to thank Wayne, from your board down to the team, and Mark and Dean, welcome. You've got, I think, stop using some language because we'll all play Perry Mason and interrogate exactly what you mean. But I think what you are encouraging is pragmatism and cooperation and good working relationships, and I hope that we can all be part of that. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fletcher, and please pass on our best wishes to Stephen Rainbow. Wayne?
Yes, Mr. Chair, can I just have your indulgence for a minute? There's one matter I want to raise, because I won't be here for the item, but thank you very much, Christine, for your comments. It's always great to hear that people see the good in what we do from time to time, so thank you for that. It's about item 14, Mr. Chair, Land Transport Management Amendment Bill. All local authorities have been given, quite frankly, the ridiculous task of responding to submissions on that within a month. Can I just say that the Land Transport Management Amendment Bill is about the regulation of public transport. Public transport in Auckland is over half the public transport in the rest of New Zealand. It's our biggest area of spend by a country mile. We've already talked about how important it is, and this bill is about how it's going to be regulated. Council's been pushed into a position of having to respond to this in a ridiculously short time without the input of the AT board, which I think is just unacceptable. It's on your agenda because you're being not to deal with the substantive matter, but to actually set up a subcommittee to sign off on the response that's being done. Could I ask at least that I'm on that subcommittee, at least so the board has some channel into this, because this is the legislation that will determine how public transport is run in Auckland for the foreseeable future. Okay.
Thanks, Wayne. We'll certainly bring that up in that item then. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. So we'll break for lunch now. Sorry, I've been moved and seconded. All those in favour that we receive the report? Against? Carried, thank you, and we'll break to 25 past 1. Okay, thank you.